Hello and welcome to the Be Formless Flow Driven CEO podcast, where we are reshaping life, leadership, and business from the inside out. And there must be some sort of theme going on at the moment because I've spoken to quite a few people from Washington, D.C., and I'm welcoming today to the show Jagathi Gade. Welcome to the show, Jagathi.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here, and I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And this is your first time doing a podcast, which is very exciting. And it's not even really like, and I'm calling it out, Jagathi, because I just think we've just got to be like who we are. And like, I loved that you called it out. And it really isn't an interview, it's a conversation. And I remember when I first did my podcast actually this time last year, and I was just freaking out about interviewing. And then I just went, you know what, I'm just going to get into it. So I feel like we're going to have, let's just treat this like a good old conversation, woman to woman, leader with lots to unpack. So I'm looking forward to getting into it. Let's start with you have two kids, one who is a freshman, one who is just about to finish their high school year. So you said to me that you're going to become the minister quite soon. So that's an interesting and different, stage of life. But you're also head of engineering of payments and embedded finance at Lightspeed Commerce. And it sounds like you've been let's just say a fintech and an AI guru for quite some time from a perspective. And you essentially, you're a veteran engineering leader and you've built trust systems across fintech from risk platforms at Square Block to trust and safety initiatives at Robinhood. I should say when I checked out your LinkedIn profile, it was like Robinhood, amazing. What a funny name. Like, what an interesting name. There must have been so many jokes at the time about it. And then, it sounds like all the companies work with Lightspeed. Yeah, very interesting. You're a long-time community builder. You advise fintech companies and on AI initiatives as well as obviously systems, speaking to the founders, etc. So advise on AI-led transformation. You do champion leadership circles where people can learn fast, be candid, and keep teams in what I like to call high flow, where they shine their brightest by feeling and performing at their best. And essentially, you turn technical complexity into clear human-centered operating rhythms. Love all of that. But what I really did, and I'm saying this on every episode, so my viewers probably getting a little bit, like be saying the same thing, but I do love reading the insight in regards to the question I asked you when you booked into the pod. And so when you booked in, I asked you what's one unique insight and lived experience when it comes to life, leadership, and or business. Yours is fascinating. So I really resonated with it. And I have, in time where you said leadership roles are lonely. And I was always reminded that when you get to the top, it can get quite lonely and that not everyone's your friend. It doesn't have to be. While each experience shapes a leader collectively, we should strive to make this community more open. We can talk about failures, lessons, insights, and openness. I want to champion for that. I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us a bit about your journey, and something must have triggered you to call out leadership roles are lonely. And it's been quite the debate. I won't lie. I've had quite the debate with quite a few people in recent in interviewing in terms of some people are going, it's not lonely. Others are saying it is lonely. I've had lonely times as a leader when you have to make the decisions and the right decision for the business and the people, but you can't make everyone happy,
Right.
let alone yourself. So over to you.
Right. Thank you for the introduction and a great segue into the topic that I'm really passionate about. I've started as an engineer. I've always been an engineer. I have an engineering degree, and along the way, I started taking on more leadership roles. At one point, it was all like individual contributor, but it's still like leadership roles. You are like responsible for the technical execution, or you're responsible for like building the architecture. And gradually, I got into like people management and like engineering management and engineering leadership. The reason I talk about it, like, being lonely is you are at the center of, you're the custodian of your teams. You're the custodian of like, the solutions and the architectures you build that will make a huge customer impact. And nothing happens in vacuum. You are collaborating every day. You're like taking decisions. You're doing the collective job as part of like, in your meetings or in your technical design reviews or in your the user experience design reviews or in your incident management. There is like a huge amount of collaboration. However, that's only one side of the coin. But there is the other side of it where like, you're responsible for managing the efficiency of the teams,
Mm.
managing the morale of the teams, managing the pulse of your organization. And that is where it gets lonely. You want to deploy, you're seeing inefficiencies. You're like, you have this overarching view, but then, you see inefficiencies. Sometimes you can like go and make a very surgical, targeted fix on those inefficiencies, but sometimes it could be like a massive revamp. It could be that you will have to deploy a reorg. You can't make everybody happy in that reorg. You have to make sure
Right.
that you keeping business intact. You have to make sure that the customer impact is not adversely affected. So you have to do certain things, and that's where like it can get lonely. That's where it feels like what is the guarantee that whatever we are doing is the right thing. But you will have to trust with your experience, with your gut, and you'll have to like check with your peers, and you'll have to like understand where the team is coming and what you can do there. And in the meantime, you also want to like protect the roles, protect the jobs, and make sure that like the team is well taken care of. Similarly, another example that I can give where it gets a little trickier is especially when there is like cross collaboration or when there are environments where the entire company is growing through uncertainty because of the industry or because of macro conditions, where you will have to be shepherding without actually knowing where you're going. Sometimes it's a very real case. Leaders don't know everything. They don't have to know everything.
No.
Um, but you have to like trust your team. The team has to trust you, and then you have to spear forward. You have to make decisions within that uncertainty, within that chaos, and try to like keep it as stable as possible. Now that is also another lonely place to be because everyone is on their own. They're all struggling in their own little world, and then to be able to talk about, to be able to soundboard, it gets very difficult. Then the third area is like where we have to create safe environments where we talk about failures. Leaders get it wrong so many times.
Yeah.
We have to talk about failures. We have to be open about failures, and failures shouldn't judge you as a leader. So that is something that I'm particularly passionate about. I always ask in my interviews, talk to me about your failures. Tell me what lessons you learned, and failing fast, failing cheap, all those things are very important to me.
What did you say? Failing fast, failing.
Cheap.
Oh, okay, yeah, got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love all of that. It's so enlightening in terms of we took like it seems so natural what you're saying right now, but yet there's still just such this facade out there that, like a leader, you should be prepared and you should be able to handle all of this and you should be able to do this. And yet the juggle is real. And I know that, with COVID, obviously a long time ago now in the scheme of things, and here we are. No one had a university degree. No one had any kind of, it was what, one in 100 years, like, crisis, if you like, and everyone was kind of working it out on their feet. And, I don't even know when I was, I had, 150 staff to manage, remotely. And I had like mental health. I had a suicide check at one point. Like it was horrible. Like there was just things happening day in, day out.
Yeah.
And so you're looking after everyone externally, but you're also then not looking after yourself from the inside as well as a leader. And, this comes right back to, I think what you said at the start, it comes back to like, this center, this connected piece, and this, for me, this heart and soul. And, when we're all operating, not as a collective and in silos, everything gets lonelier because you're disconnected from you're trying to survive, you're in this survival mode.
Yeah.
And so nothing's really thriving. And I think quite often even, and I'd like your thoughts on this because, we've got like, gosh, I've been like everywhere. We're in this fire horse year. It's kicked in yesterday. Everyone's talking about the momentum and everything this year. And, the last few years have been not that fun, to be honest. And then, we've got this AI, revolution, if you like. Probably not too dissimilar from, the internet and things like that. But our leaders, facing even more loneliness than ever? Or is the reason why you are on the mission to champion this is because we need to nip it in the bud so that we can get back to operating from a place of connectedness, heart, soul, thriving?
Yeah, that's an interesting point and angle, and thank you for exploring that. So yes, AI is a watershed moment. I mean, we have seen some of us have seen these kind of watershed moments in our
Yeah.
careers, like the internet or like 5G or like the cloud platforms, where compute became cheaper and faster. And AI is not dissimilar to that, as you have mentioned. There's a lot of like uncertainty and a lot of vagueness and a lot of over information also around us. You open any social media platform, people are talking about how it has helped them or how they are like doing all these innovative things. At the same time, there are also like skeptics who are talking about how it's not really fetching them, or there is really no significant business impact or measurable business impact. Then there are all these like learning platforms where you can learn, and things are changing very fast. By the time you learn about AI, it's like, hey, you got to learn about agentic AI. By the time you
Yeah.
learn about agentic AI, it's something else. Then there is like the depth in that. Some people are very interested in understanding the math behind the AI and why AI models work or where they don't work. So it's kind of like, so much of information, so much of skepticism, so much of optimism. Again, it comes back to like navigating that as a leader, navigating that as a person, navigating that as like, a parent or like, whatever other roles that you take on. You're navigating this kind of like over information or like this watershed moment, however you want to see the glass, uh, in a very like in a very haphazard manner. There are days where I'm like very pumped. I'm like, okay, great, we are going to use AI tools and we are going to improve the efficiencies. Then suddenly there is also a wave of like, oh my god, this information is too much, I need
Yeah,
a break.
overwhelming.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. So to me, it feels like, as leaders, we should talk about that. We should talk about the fact that, yes, sometimes it can get overwhelming. There's no
Mm.
shame in that. I do think that, we should talk about those ups and downs, the good days and bad days. And that is where, like, I want to champion that. Like, it doesn't have to be a lone battle, and we don't have to carry that stigma to say that, oh, if I say that it's overwhelming, is it going to like portray me as a bad leader? No, it shouldn't. So that's my take in this angle in terms of being able to keep up with the pace, but have the empathy that you can't always run. There will be moments where you probably will have to take a pause. Your teams will also take a pause at like different paces again. But then the important part is that we dust ourselves up, we run again.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it, that you talk around the lone battle and keeping up with the pace. That's why I was kind of referring to the fire horse and just this like it's just like, let's go. It's like, hang on a second. Like, hang on, let's just keep ourselves grounded as well. Why do you think then that we are still, struggling with this loneliness in leadership? Is it because people, like you've talked a bit about failure, but is it more that people, like, is this about reshaping and redefining success? Like, is it more that people don't want to feel like, if they expose their vulnerability, if they expose it themselves, that they're feeling lonely, they're feeling disconnected? Like, what is it? Why is it still such a big challenge for leaders? What are you seeing? Or, even, yeah.
Uh, I think one of the reasons is perhaps like the perceptions, managing the perceptions and managing the image. But I've seen the world changing too. A lot of like the startup founders talk about their failures or like why certain things don't work. I've also seen in terms of especially in the startups where like the advice or like the collective wisdom was not taken and hence something failed. They're coming out and like talking about it. But then there is also like this image of someone once told me like leadership is like a duck. You are on the water, you're
Yeah.
floating on the water very smoothly, but then you're paddling very hard underneath the surface. I want to question that. I want to challenge that status quo. Is leadership really, does it have to be a duck smoothly sailing on the river and you don't want to see anyone paddling very hard underneath the surface? Or is it like, do you want to keep it real? I mean, I don't mean to say that, hey, come off as like this chaotic, confused person. You can still hold your ground. You can still bring in your
Yeah.
wisdom. You can still bring in your experience. But that stigma around like, hey, you got to hide all the paddling, the crazy paddling, that part is where like, I want to challenge the community.
I agree. Like so I've had, been told you can't be so emotional, you can't wear your heart on your sleeve, but I am who I am. Like, like I am. That's me. Like, and I'm very structured. I know where I'm going, but there's times where I will wear my heart on my sleeve and I am just that sort of a person. And I think that when we're conditioned to this is the leader. Like, and I do the box because like you have to be this type. You have to dress like this. You have to act like this. All of that. It's restricting you from being your most authentic self. And I think that creates loneliness in itself because you're being pushed in down further and further within. Your soul's being squashed and you
Yeah.
can't be truly yourself. And I think that, the more we can embrace this authenticity, living to our purpose, being able to be who we truly are, that is going to shape the future leaders that, and going to hopefully eradicate loneliness because loneliness is an epidemic. It's not just from a leader's point, standpoint, obviously with the revolution of technology and I wrote down just before I was reading the other day even the founder of OpenAI and he was talking about I've forgotten his name for the life of me but I should know that he was talking about ChatGPT being his CEO and him stepping aside for the machine to be the CEO and I just stopped and I was just like that is fascinating, isn't it, in itself? Like, because if you
Yeah.
think about a machine, you think about it as a human, machines
Yeah.
can they get lonely? That's like, even like, that is just, like, we could have
Yeah.
a whole discussion on machine loneliness. I
Yeah.
don't think they can because they find the patterns, whereas the humans, so we've kind of got this really interesting thing going on here where it's like humans, like you say, or the leaders are getting like potentially getting lonelier or not.
Yeah.
And then you've got these humans that are potentially going to take on, sorry, the machines are potentially going to take on these leadership roles.
Yeah.
Like, what's your thoughts on all of that? Like, did you read that? Did you observe that? That they came out.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, like, see, I think a while ago, even before like AI was such an important thing in our lives, there was a study by Google where like they did not have managers on the team. Are you familiar with that study? I mean, there was a study where like they didn't have managers. The teams did not perform well
Yeah,
at all.
flatline. Yeah.
They kind of came back. See, to me, I mean, we are reading a lot of literature also around this, and a lot of studies are coming up around it. More and more important skills are going to be empathy and the human judgment and the creativity part of it. And leadership is a prime role where you can demonstrate all these things, where you can build these skills, where we can show how good teams operate or how good organizations operate. To your earlier point, I totally believe in there are two characteristics that make a leader great. One is like the authenticity, and the other one is depth.
Oh, yeah.
Um, bring your whole selves to work. What
Yeah.
we see at work in on teams is basically just like the top of the iceberg. There is a whole another piece of big mountain that is under the surface that each person or each team is battling with, or like they have their own lives. So what we expect at work is only part of it. So bring your whole selves to work, which is the mantra I try to live by, because that's where like the layered thinking comes. That's where the depth of a person shows.
Yeah.
So to me, authenticity and depth are two main characteristics. Whether a machine can like run an entire company, probably, like logistically, it can run an entire company. Probably it can like, think very creatively. It can see like patterns and
Mm.
whatnot. But I do think that, it cannot replace that part of, bringing your whole self to work, bringing your depth to work, and bringing your authenticity to work. So that characteristic is what I feel like it still sets apart like great leaders.
Yeah, I love it. It's because could you imagine how soulless it'd be if we just had machines running the country, like running the world? Like, I've had that many different conversations, and one that still blows my mind is that the robots are taking over. There was this, like, it was amazing, Udi from Israel, and I need to like promote that one because he talked around they are taking over, but there's an opportunity then for humans to get back to what they should be getting back to. And I think that leadership for so long has been like we're just saying, it's been that, you have to be this, you have to be that. And then here you are calling out, and I absolutely concur and love, that whole self. There's a whole style, a new form of leadership, if you like, that is very different, excuse me, to what we know now. And that's the bit I look forward to and seeing come to life more, because I think the more we can be our whole self. Like, you're a mum, you've got two children, they're at really critical points in their, time. They're in their formative years of becoming the leaders that they want to be, whether they take leadership specific roles or not. So you're a leader in a business, an organization. You advise to founders, but you've also like got a leadership as a mum. Like, that in itself is like, so it's almost like you've got different hats that you wear. Like, how do you put on a different leadership hat for the different roles you play, from a whole self perspective?
Yeah, see that's a very interesting point because I always think about even like how sometimes I operate with my kids exactly like how I would operate a business. Are we looking at the big picture? In the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things, does this small thing matter? Or sometimes you are feeling the way you are feeling because of something else, and I understand and I respect that. So it again comes back to the same framework that I adopt in life, which is authenticity and depth. And like the fundamental understanding that the circumstances are very layered. It's not like black and white. This is not to say that we promote like bullshit for a lack of better word.
Yeah.
But it is more about understanding and the circumstances. So yes, when I operate like in different things, as an advisor, I am like this. As a friend, I'm something else. As a mom, I'm something else. As a mom of teenagers, I'm completely something else. But in all these things, the core values of empathy, the core values of the transparency, the vulnerability, the authenticity, all those things remain the same. And then that is what I probably anchor myself to in all the various facets of my life.
Mm. And so how far away do you think we are? Like, I mean, in terms of coming back to this, right back to full circle to championing. Oh my goodness, me trying to get the words out. There you go. Like, leadership, like from a leadership and combating this loneliness. If you think about, like, there's a lot of mega trends at the moment around AI, and it's all around the agentic orchestration. Like you said, it's not like, you learn one thing and then it's we're here now, like 20, like if we go back to the start of 2025, wow, compared to where we are now, like even what I was just co-piloting and creating yesterday, I wouldn't
Yeah.
have been able to do that 12 months ago. But like, you just keep playing and doing things right. In terms of, is the loneliness issue that you're seeing within leadership, is this something that do you think is going to be rectified sooner rather than later, or do you think this is a slow build and we need to be having more and more conversations around it, less surface and going back to depth? Like, yeah.
I'm optimistic. I do think, like, the more leaders talk about the transparency, vulnerability, how they're feeling, I think, we will get there very soon.
Mm.
And we're also at this, like, at this influx of the entire thing. Like you said, 2025 is vastly different from 2026, so far at least. And we are going to see more and more like machine integration, more and more things being taken care by machines. And I think it's now universal knowledge that like we need to embrace the machine becoming part of our life. And I think we are doing a pretty good job there embracing AI. But I do think that the more conversations we have about the different aspects of sharing vulnerability and like sharing our failures, the faster we'll get there. So I think So to summarize, I'm optimistic. I think we will get there much faster. A lot of leaders are talking about it. I'm seeing like, even a lot of like LinkedIn posts or like the social media platforms where they are challenging an advice. Recently, I've seen like, a VC, a very prominent VC, having advised on a particular thing, and I have seen like, a bunch of comments about like challenging that status quo, and like people talking about how this particular mindset has led them to like fail, or like, how it is an
Yeah.
important lesson to be learned. So I was very happy about that, because the conversation became very open, the conversation became transparent. So yeah, I mean, I think we should continue this. We should not like, give it up to say that, okay, you're on your own. As a collective community of leaders, as a collective community of like, executives, we should talk about this, and we should continue to do that. But I feel like, us embracing AI is going to accelerate this, if any.
It's going to what? Sorry?
Accelerate this.
Yeah,
It's
I
going to
agree. No,
accelerate
no,
this,
no.
all the more reason for us to be empathetic, all the more reason for us to show the depth and like authenticity. So I believe that like, it's all going to act as a catalyst for us to get there.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that. Do you think that like, and without, like, I'm not about men and I'm not about women, like, and separating it, but do you think that, like, I'm seeing a lot more men talk about their challenges and the loneliness, or the sense like lost, like lack of purpose and having to find it, like these men, like you just talked about the VCs, like I've interviewed quite a few, at like a lot, and I'm loving their vulnerability coming out as well, because I'm just like, here are these super successful men,
Right.
but talking about the loneliness and the identity, challenges that they've faced, etc. And so I think that, women like are generally, women generally, we're more emotional, we're more, kind of, it's that male female energy flow sort of thing. But I think that the more we can, like, women, there's a lot of hard women out there, tough women out there too. But I think if we can have like a combination of, like, what's your view on that as well? Like,
Yeah, no, see, so that's an interesting angle, because I don't mean to separate men or women
no,
in the leadership role per se, but I do agree that like women have a bit heavier burden to show a very calm and composed facade.
yeah,
Part of it is also because women are expected to be the natural nurturers. At some point, like I mean, I recall one moment where like. In one of the feedback sessions for me, someone wrote that like she never came back and checked on me. Um, after deploying a reorg, she never came back and checked on me. Was a very specific feedback. I doubt if that feedback would have been given to a man. Um, so the expectation is that there is a little bit more of nurturing and care to be given.
mm,
But is that nurturing and care coming to a woman again, because of the facade, or because of, the veil that sometimes women have to are expected to put on, also kind of creates an imbalance. It is unfortunate, but it is true that,
yeah,
this kind of imbalance exists. And, like every leader should strive for like making it
yeah.
like unanimous and same, and every leader who comes in, there shouldn't be that extra burden of managing because of who they are.
I love how when you're talking, it's like it happens to me a lot. The questions come to me, or it's almost like you start talking. I've got a question in my head, and then you start talking about it. It's kind of like talk about being in sync, in flow. Like it's interesting. The question I have is, and you were just talking about it briefly, was what do you do on the days that you talked around, you got called, like pulled up, if you like, when you didn't go in and check on somebody, and as a female, and that nurturing side of us, that I would be thinking about that. I'd process it, go through my head, and I'd go back to the actual scenario, going, did I, didn't I? Like, you're sensing yourself because you've been pulled up on something quite so specific, and it's almost like questioning your caring about capabilities. More broadly, though, what do you do on the days when you feel lonely as a leader? Like, what's your way to pull you? Like, we talked around this oscillating between when you're in it and how you pull yourself out of it. And I think, as leaders, we need more and more self-awareness for ourselves and our feelings, but also from the external, the collective. I mean, no doubt you have your lonely days as a leader. that would have been a lonely moment because you're trying to work it out in your head. Like, what do you do on those days?
I mean, like we all have that concentric circles of like thinking, right? Like we first start questioning it. Did I not do the right thing? And if the answer is a very simple yes, you didn't do the right thing, then just go do the right thing. Apologize to say that hey, I meant to check in on you, but I never got it in
Yeah.
that particular. But when you go through that thinking, you will understand that there really wasn't anything to check in. That person
No.
is absolutely fine. Their job was intact. They were doing exactly the same thing that they were doing before. It just is in a new setting, and you're expected to adapt to the new setting because there was like an
Yeah.
entire story built around why the new setting is needed. So once you have that, I try to build a community around me, like lean in on other leaders, build that trust levels, build that like, rapport. And sometimes I even went to my mentor and said that, I am melting down. I don't know what to do here. And then they have been very kind to offer support. In fact, my mentor has been this like seasoned leader who's a guy, and he has offered so much of support. So first ask yourself that question, if you did the right thing or not. And if it is a clear answer of like no, then just go rectify that.
Yeah.
If it's a clear answer of yes, or if it's even a vague answer of yes, go start leaning into your community, build that community, invest into that community, and be open to talk about it. Hey, this is where I made a mistake, can I rectify it? Have that like that courage to ask that question if I made a mistake. And I always tell my kids also, start building mirrors in your life. Someone should be able to hold a mirror to say that like what you did is wrong, or like hey, no, it's not a big deal, you'll pass through this moment. Sometimes that community can be of like most of the times that community will be helpful, but sometimes it can even get lonely there too, that like you're not probably able to articulate or come across very clearly what your confusion or like your thought process is. But there too, like keep working at it. That's what I normally do.
Yeah, the other big one for me is nothing's ever personal, is it? Like when it comes to like, I love how you just called it out. Like if you've done something wrong, just call it out and just get on with it and rectify it. Or actually stop overthinking it. Like there was nothing in it. There's nothing personal here. I always say that because I think that we quite often take things so personally when at times
Great.
it's just business. It's just there's nothing personal. I'll even use that language at times. This is not personal, like these are just the facts. And I think we also need to kind of, as much as we need that empathy and that human judge, well, it's human judgment, and but it's the ability to also just to call it. I think quite often we feed drama, we allow things to fester, which also then results in more loneliness because we get so stuck up here in
Yeah.
our heads, and the amygdala is like going nuts, and then but we're not embodying it, like we're not coming into our whole self and like feeling, well, actually, hang on, does that feel like it's gone against my gut, my intuition? Am I feeling anywhere in my body like that, the friction? And I think that quite often we just need to like listen to what we're actually is going on here, and it takes me right, even further to the pause and the presence, being able to be pause versus react, get that monkey off your back to then determine, what you like, what I guess how to respond, if you like, because, quite often we respond too fast. So, okay,
Yeah.
one final question for you. The younger generation, you've got a girl and a boy. I was about to say the two boys, you've got a daughter and a son. What's your hope for the younger generation? Like, what are you seeing that's different from, when we were coming up through, leadership? What are you noticing and hoping
It's a
for?
very good segue to the point you just mentioned about like getting the monkey off their back. It's very difficult in their world because they are like constantly on social media, or they have
Yeah.
like some sort of a very perennial virtual presence. And when your content or when what you bring to the table is often judged by the number of the likes and number of like reposts and things
Yeah.
like that. It's very difficult to kind of get oneself out of their head and to develop that judgment of like what is it that we need to give weight to, and what is it that we need to kind of like pass through and stay stronger. For the next generation leaders, I would love to like advocate for the strength in thought process while keeping like, a softer heart and a stronger mind.
Oh, I love that. Softer heart and a stronger mind. So good. You're great. You're great having for this being your first podcast. You're like a rock star. You should be doing this more. Like, you can start
Well,
your own.
you are very easy to talk to and you're very so warm and friendly. I really appreciate that.
No, thank you. No, thank you. Jagathi, do you have any other wise words of wisdom or anything else you would like to, like in concluding our chat? Is there anything that you want to, call out? No, is there any? Yeah.
Um, I think we have pretty much covered like everything we had in mind. But yeah, to conclude, leadership is awesome. It's a privilege, and it's such a fortunate thing to be able to to lead organizations, to lead people, to create that impact that we come to work every day. So I'm like I'm blessed. I would never want to do anything else. But at the same time, let's keep the doors open to talk about the
Mm,
places where we succeed, the talk about the places where we fail, learn from each other, build this community. There is no like, right now, even if, in this, we are in this together. And we are also bringing in the machines together into this. We are bringing like, big
yes.
models into this. So there are a lot of players here. So we kind of have to, hold hands together and move forward. A lot of opportunities, a lot of like, different, how fortunate are we to see so many watershed moments in our life, right? In our
Oh, I
careers.
know.
So
Wild.
I'm like very very grateful for all that. But building the community, leaning on each other, that's something that I'm very passionate about.
So good. I love it. What a great conversation. Oh gosh, love it. We'll have to regroup again towards the end of the year. I keep saying it to everyone I'm talking to at the moment because it's just like it's watershed moments at the moment, and we're in like just huge amounts of change, and we can either be worried and about the uncertainty and the complexity of it all, or we can just jump into it and just, you know, yeah, it's very exciting and have the courage and the ability to be our whole self. So thank you so much. How do we find out more about Lightspeed? Lightspeed Commerce. How do we find out more about you? Mm.
The best place is like, LinkedIn and what we do, what I do as part of my day job is to make like payment seamless for like all the merchants, small
Yeah,
businesses, large businesses, micro businesses, so that they don't have to worry about how to take money. They can just do about like, their craft, what they are very good at, what they are selling, and make sure that like, their money reaches on time.
amazing. Thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and like I said, you're a bright light. And I didn't say that, but you are a bright light, and you're a pro at this. Like you've just brought your whole self to this conversation, and I love it when we, it was almost like we always do this. We say I haven't done this before, or this is, and then all of it's like, not even that. Like let's just throw ourselves into it and see how it goes. Like,
Yeah, I know. I love the approach. I love the fact that like, this just like raw conversations and I totally appreciate and I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. It's amazing, it's amazing. And I'd love to stay in touch.
me too. Thank you. We'll have a wonderful evening, and yeah, thank you so much, Jagathi. Take care.